Shabbat Shalom Umevorach. Shabbat Shalom. Good Shabbos, good Shabbos, my holy sisters and brothers. That tune, that song was just being sung by the Moshav band, Yehuda Solomon and David Swirsky, a melody by Shlomo Carlebach, and I'm going to tell you the story of where that melody comes from and how it spread out throughout the world in one moment. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us on this beautiful Friday as we're getting ready for Shabbos? It's always beautiful when we're getting ready for Shabbos. Melissa Eitel Jurin says, good Shabbos from Great Neck, New York. Pauline Michael, Shabbat Shalom from Arkansas. James Roth says, Shabbat Shalom. Yehudit Sobel, Shabbat Shalom from Florence, South Carolina. Bill Eldridge says, Shalom. May your Sabbath be restful and joyful. Good to see you, Bill. Guy Thomas Kennedy, Dayton, Ohio, is with you now. Todd Hacker from Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Lindsay Adams says Shalom Aleichem from Cincinnati, Ohio. Paula Schmidt-Klauser from Chicago. Patrice Carter says Shalom from St. George. Loves the music. Amanda Lewis, Shabbat Shalom. Diane Hagan from Fridley, Minnesota. And Ayora says Shabbat Shalom from Merced, California. Lisa Gilman says Shabbat Shalom. Sammy McIntyre is with us from Tacoma, Washington. Lindsay Adams is digging the music. Yehudit Sobel says wishing Nina, Sal, and all a restful and rejuvenating Shabbos. Sue Strauss in the house from Chicago. Amanda Lewis, Shabbat Shalom from California. Christina Poltrineri sends a bunch of emojis. I love it. Lisa Gilman is so happy to be here. Christina Poltrineri says Shalom. Alana Mainers says Shabbat Shalom from Ventura, California. Karen Murphy, blessings from New Zealand. And over on the YouTube side, Mirasia Janut says Shabbat Shalom from Atlanta, Georgia. And Neil says Shabbat Shalom from Virginia. May it be joyous for all. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? That melody, Shabbat Shalom. We usually use it for the Mizmor LeDavid. It's one of the psalms that we sing on Shabbos. It's a beautiful, beautiful melody. It's intense. It's driving. And it's throughout the world. And it's usually for that Mizmor LeDavid. But it was originally composed on the spot by Shlomo Carlebach. He was being interviewed on a Friday morning in Israel. And on the radio, and the interviewer says, so you're the singing rabbi. I hear that you write songs on the spot. I'd like to see that. Write a song right now here in our radio studio. And Shlomo, Reb Shlomo, he kind of like stroked his beard for a moment. This is how Yehuda Solomon told this story to me. He says, Reb Shlomo stroked his beard. He thought for a moment. And with Shabbos coming, he said, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom umevorach. Isn't that awesome? And that's just becomes such an important melody. You heard it sung in our movie, When Do We Eat? If you've seen our movie, Yehuda was actually one of the singing cantors in the movie. I mean, that's just such a great melody, and I love that it was just written on the spot by Shlomo Carlebach in a radio studio when challenged to write a song on the spot. May we all, hit a home run like that when we're at bat. Okay, so before we get into our daf, let's just take a moment. This is 9/11, 19 years ago. I'm sure like me, you remember where you were when you heard the awful news, and then we watched the news all day. Everybody who died that day, may their memories always be for a blessing. I just heard today for the first time, I saw it on Humans of Judaism. I can't remember his name right now. But it was a veteran, an Israeli veteran of special forces who happened to be on one of those planes, saw that what was going was not good, and the hijacking started, and he rushed one of the terrorists to try to prevent it. He got stabbed and killed, and he was the first casualty. on that day. So we honor him. I'm sorry I don't have his name at the tip of my tongue right now. But we honor him, and everybody who died that day will never forget. Our lives were really changed that day. All right. We are holding on Eruvin, Lamed Gimel. That's Daf Lamed Gimel, page 33 of Tractate Eruvin, the third volume of the Talmud. We're in chapter 3 and discussing Mishnah number 4. So what we're talking about, and by the way, I have a story for you. That's why the title of today's show is The Tale of the Crook and the Rookie Lawyer. It's an amazing story. I heard it from Rabbi Yekusiel Kalmanson. I'm going to share that at the end of the show. So it's going to be a relatively short teaching, and then we're going to get to that story. All right. So what we're talking about is making an eruv, right? That's what this whole volume is about. We keep doing it over and over again. And so basically it's so that we can join courtyards or join a community in an area so that we can carry within that area on Shabbos the same way that we can carry objects within a private domain like our home. When there's an eruv, we can carry objects from our home into the yard, out into the neighborhood, as long as we're within the eruv. Or a different kind of eruv when we want to change the location, the legal location of our Shabbos dwelling, because we want to walk further than we would be allowed to walk otherwise in one direction. So we move our dwelling along that path that we want to go on Shabbos, because let's say we want to go to our friend's house for Shabbos lunch, and he lives beyond my Sabbath boundary. So I reestablish my dwelling, my technical dwelling, somewhere between me and my friend's house. And now, the first part of my walk is to my technical dwelling, and then the second part is to his house, and I'm going to be able to go. And what I lose, what I gain that I go in that direction, I lose of my ability to walk in this direction, but I'm not going there anyway. I want to go that way. So we want to have this ability to change our Shabbos dwelling. In either case, whether we're making an enclosure that we're going to carry within or we're moving our dwelling so we can go further in that direction, we need to establish that Shabbos dwelling with a basket of food. And what we've been talking about for a while now is, well, what kind of food goes in there? What's the minimum amount? And what's the location? And what's the status of the food? And that's what we're talking about. It's establishing the Shabbos dwelling by putting a basket of food somewhere not in my own home. Okay, so now we're talking about what if we put that basket of food to establish the eruv in a tree, right? What happens if we put it in a tree? And as we discussed yesterday, in a public domain, and we're probably going to want to put it in a public domain because it's between me and where I'm going. I could locate it in a private domain along the way at my friend's house, but it might be in a public domain. If it's in a private domain, I have no problem. It's like, okay, I'm making my Shabbos dwelling at my friend's house in his private domain. I'm going to locate that basket of food there. I'm going to put it there before Shabbos. Right, so now my first half of my walk is to, this friend, and then I want to go to that other friend's house who lives further away, and so I'm going to be able to do that. But if I'm putting that basket of food in a public domain, so then other stuff comes into it. First of all, wherever I put that basket, I have the legal fiction as if I own those 4 cubits, those 4 square cubits, where I put the basket, like that's my private domain. Just for the purposes of the eruv. So it's like I have my own private domain within the larger public domain, and it's just defined by where I put that basket of food. And a private domain extends upward. The air rights above your private domain go up infinitely. Whereas the airspace above a public domain only goes up 10 handbreadths, 10 tefachim, so about waist high. And then beyond that, it's not a public domain or a private domain. There, it's an exempt domain, right? It's not a domain. And you can move things in and out of an exempt domain on Shabbos. That is permitted. But as we see, there's going to be some difficulties. Okay, so if we put that basket of food in a tree in the public domain, this is the case that we're talking about and that we're struggling a little bit to understand, okay? So, all right. So if I place my eruv on a branch, okay, so if I have this situation, this is better if we see it. Okay. All right. So let's say that I put my eruv in a tree and it's on a branch. And it's on a branch. Hopefully you can see that beyond the reflections. And it's on this branch and it's above 10 handbreadths, or it's between 3 and 10 handbreadths. That's what's going on here, right? If it's above 10 handbreadths, that's going to be another problem. So here it's below 10 handbreadths, but it's further out than the 4 at the bottom, right? The 4 cubits at the bottom. So here the issue is the person intended to create an eruv not in the tree. Like if you actually say my Shabbos dwelling is up in the tree, like I'm going to climb that tree and it's going to be in the tree, that's not so bad. But what he intended was that his Shabbos dwelling is at the foot of the tree. And then he put his basket of food in the tree, but more than 4 cubits from the trunk of the tree. And the issue is it's not above that private domain he meant to establish by depositing his basket of food near that tree. He thought of it like, okay, so my dwelling for Shabbos is this tree. It's in this tree. In his mind, he was like, so what I'm thinking is at the base of the tree, like within 4 cubits of the base of the tree. But he put his basket of food further away in the tree and off the ground, and maybe more than 10 handbreadths off the ground, but further from the trunk of the tree than the 4 cubits which are above his own little private domain that he meant to establish. So now he's got a problem that for him to get the basket of food, he's going to have to move it right from the public domain to his private domain. That's carrying from a public domain to a private domain. And that's prohibited. That's the issue here. That's the problem. So the eruv is not in his domain, the one he intended to create, and how is he going to get it into his domain, right? If he walks up there into the tree and like grabs it and sort of walks through the tree to get it over to his thing, so he's making use of the tree. And we saw that there's a rabbinic decree that you can't make use of a tree on Shabbos. Like you can't, lean something against it. Like you can't hang a partition on a tree that's going to, be part of an enclosure. You could create that before Shabbos, but you can't make use of a tree on Shabbos. So he's got all these problems. Like he can't get to his eruv. So then the solution is suggested here in the Gemara that, well, actually, if he moves the basket higher along, like through the branches of the tree, higher than 10 handbreadths, right? Like this. So he's moving it within the exempt domain. It's above the public domain and more than 10 handbreadths above the public domain. So he could bring it over to his space, his sort of vertical space above his own 4 cubits at the base of the tree. And then, he never made use of the tree and he didn't move from one domain to another, from public to private or private to public. So he hasn't violated any prohibitions. Now the system works. His eruv is a valid eruv and he can go walking where he wanted to go. Then it would work, right? So that would be good. Then it would be a valid eruv. Okay. I'm not going to go into every single one of these nuances because, not everybody's so interested in exactly how to establish the eruv in a tree and the domains that exist. I'm not going to do every one of these nuances. So that's one way to make it valid. Now, the Gemara is going to ask that we had this principle that came up yesterday, and which is going to affect our analysis today, and which is that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rebbi, said that anything which is prohibited on Shabbos by rabbinic decree is not prohibited during the twilight before Shabbos. Now this makes sense, right? Because rabbinic decrees are fully enforceable and we have to follow them just like Torah, biblical decrees, biblical laws. But there's a difference between rabbinic laws and biblical laws when there's a case of doubt, right? When we're not sure if we're going to violate this law or not. In a case of doubt, if it's a biblical law, we're going to rule stringently to make sure that we don't come to violate the biblical prohibition. If it's a rabbinic law, we're going to rule leniently because rabbinic laws were created to, either to beautify Shabbos, to make it more restful and beautiful, or more usually, they're created to prevent us from coming to transgress a biblical prohibition. So they're layered on top of the biblical laws, and the rabbis don't go so far as to make a stringency on a stringency, right? They're not going to add an additional law to keep us from violating rabbinic laws, since the rabbinic laws were only created to keep us from violating biblical laws. Twilight is a time of doubt. We're not sure if Shabbos has begun or not. Since we're not sure whether this whether it's Shabbos or not, a rabbinic law, the prohibition to make use of a tree, for example, it's not going to apply during twilight, at least according to Rebbi. This is his ruling. He says anything prohibited on Shabbos by rabbinic decree is not prohibited during twilight. We're not sure right now if everybody agrees with him or not, but this is Rebbi's ruling. The Gemara asks, what's his source for that? So the source for us saying that this is how Rebbi holds comes from Tractate Eruvin and the discussion that we're having right now. So let's read this ruling. Okay, so it's brought here. It's from a Tosefta, which is sort of like a Mishna, but not a Mishna. Like a Baraisa, but not a Baraisa. Okay, so the Gemara cites the source of the disagreement. As it was taught in the Tosefta, if one placed his eruv in a tree above 10 handbreadths from the ground, his eruv is not a valid eruv. Right? So here we're saying, so if you placed it more than 10 handbreadths above the ground in a public domain, in a tree, it's not a valid eruv, according to the Tosefta. If he placed it below 10 handbreadths, his eruv is a valid eruv, but he is prohibited to take it on Shabbos in order to eat it because it is prohibited to use the tree, right? So it's like I guess in order to take it out of the tree, you're going to make use of the tree, and you can't make use of a tree on Shabbos. If the eruv is within 3 handbreadths of the ground, he's permitted to take it because as we've seen over and over again, when two things are within 3 handbreadths of each other, there's a legal presumption or legal fiction almost that they're touching, right? They're close enough that it's as if they were touching. And so something that's within 3 handbreadths of the ground, it's like it's on the ground. And so then he could, even though it's on the tree, it's not like he's using the tree in order to make use of that eruv, so he could take the food and he could eat it. If one placed the eruv in a basket and hung it on a tree, even above 10 handbreadths, his eruv is a valid eruv. This is the statement of Rebbi, of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. And the rabbis disagree. What do they disagree with? They're actually disagreeing with this idea that within from 3 to 10 handbreadths, it's a valid eruv, but you can't take the food from the eruv. The rabbis are going to disagree with that, and they're going to say in any situation in which the eruv was placed in a location where it is prohibited to take it, the eruv is not a valid eruv. So that's where the rabbis disagree with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So let's break down this Tosefta so we understand it better. If this food was placed above 10 handbreadths in the public domain, right? So just generally speaking, if it's above 10 handbreadths, it's either in a private domain or in an exempt domain, right? So if it's in a private domain and you have your own 4 cubits where you intended to establish your Shabbos dwelling, that's like a private domain, that extends infinitely up. So if it's above 10 handbreadths, doesn't matter. If it's more than 10 handbreadths above public domain, well, then this thing is in an exempt domain. But where is it? Is it floating? Maybe it's hung up on a stick, so it's not in some kind of private domain. But if it's above 10 handbreadths and it's on some kind of a surface that's more than 4 square cubits, that's its own private domain. And if you transferred that from that little private domain to where you're standing in the public domain, then you violated Shabbos on a biblical level because you transferred something from a private domain to a public domain. So the issue here is that it's a private domain and it's not within his 4 cubits at the base, and he needs to hold on a second, and he can't transfer to his 4 amos, his 4 cubits, because of the unique case. Okay, so let me show you this. Thank God we have these drawings, or this would never make sense. So if you look at this image here, all right, so what you've got is at the base of the tree, there's the 4 square cubits that he intended to establish as his Shabbos dwelling. He put it in a tree, that brown parcel up high. He put it up there, and now what we said before, right in the previous figure, okay, so he could just transfer it way up through the exempt domain over to his private domain. Because it was so high, it was always in an exempt domain, or it went from a private domain to a private domain. It didn't go through the public domain. It only traveled through the exempt domain. But because this lower branch is typically used by people who walk by in order to adjust their burdens, that lower branch gets the status of the public domain itself. And therefore, if you transferred the eruv, the food for the eruv, through that airspace above the place where people adjust their burdens, you would be going through the public domain, and now you again made that transfer from a private domain to a public domain, and then from the public domain out to his private domain. So it's not a valid eruv. It doesn't work. You can't do that. That's the issue in this case that's being set up by the Gemara. Okay. Then in the Tosefta it said between 3 and 10 handbreadths above the ground, and in the tree it's a valid eruv, but he's prohibited to take it, right? And below 3 handbreadths, it's as if it's on the ground, and that's why there's no problem there. In that 3 to 10 area, there's this question of, okay, we don't have the problem that it's too high and the transferring from going too high. It's below 10 handbreadths, but it's on the tree, so we're going to have to make use of the tree. Rebbi permits us to make use of the tree at twilight because it's a rabbinic decree against making use of the tree. And at twilight, there's a doubt if it's even Shabbos at all. So since he had the possibility to go eat that food during twilight, it's a valid eruv and he can rely on it on Shabbos. But the rabbis disagree. So what is it that they disagree on? They must say that in terms of the rabbinic decree against making use of a tree, twilight doesn't exempt that. They disagree with Rebbi on that principle. So that's where we are at the end of today. Tomorrow we'll continue a little bit more with what happens when an eruv is in a tree. What I want to do now is share this story of the Crook and the rookie lawyer, because it's a beautiful story as we start getting ready for Rosh Hashanah. We've got 1 week to go. Next Friday night is Rosh Hashanah. It's a Shabbos Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, the first day of Rosh Hashanah, is going to coincide with Shabbos next week. So I heard this story from Rabbi Yekusiel Kalmanson. It's a true story. It was going around a few years ago. And it goes like this. If you have questions or comments, by the way, please put them in the comments. And after I tell the story, I'll get to your questions and comments. All right. The story goes like this. There's a community in Israel, and it's sort of like a community of religious people, religious Jewish Americans who have made Aliyah, who have moved to Israel. And it's a well-to-do community. It's a nice community, right? Like very nice homes. These are people who did quite well for themselves financially, and their dream was always to move to Israel at some point. And they were able to do that. And often it was, people who, they did it when they retired, but they had enough resources that they could also bring children and grandchildren and establish this like really beautiful community in Israel. So it's like a large community, but really, founded and the patriarchs of it, let's say, the patriarchs and matriarchs of it are these couples in their 70s. So there was a bunch of these guys in their 70s, and they had a study group in such a community in Israel. And just like we've made a siyum when we finished a volume of the Talmud, right? We made a siyum when we finished Tractate Brachas, and we made another one when we finished Tractate Shabbos. And God willing, we'll make another one when we finish Tractate Eruvin. So in this study group, they were making a siyum on what you can make a siyum not just on volumes of the Talmud, whatever you're studying. Sometimes people are reading the Bible. Somebody was asking about, there's a program called 929 where you study one chapter of the Bible every day on the same schedule. It takes about 3 years to read the whole Bible, reading one chapter a day. And I have a commentary coming up in that program on their website on Monday on Malachi 3, the third chapter of Malachi, the last book, the last prophet, and the last book in the prophet section of the Bible. At any rate, they were making a siyum on whatever book they were studying. And they were celebrating. You often celebrate when you make a siyum and, eat a little food and have some mashka, have some alcohol and make a l'chaim. And they had a few l'chaims. And one of the guys, just was very emotional. Maybe the l'chaims helped, maybe that they finished this course of study. Maybe he was just feeling close to his friends in the study group. And he said, you guys look at me and you see a religious Jew who has been so blessed and fortunate and made Aliyah and is living in Israel and studying Torah in Israel, and I was able to bring my kids, and my grandkids are here now, and it's all been such a blessing in my life. But you guys don't really know how much of a blessing this is. Let me tell you a little bit about myself that you may not know, said this man in his 70s at the Siyum in Israel. And he said, when I was young, quite young, like when I was about 19, I had gotten into a lifestyle that you people wouldn't even understand. He was from Brooklyn. He grew up in a tough neighborhood. He was Jewish, but not from a religious family at all. And he got into running with the really wrong crowd and was just involved in serious criminal activities, I think primarily having to do with drug dealing. And he got involved in escalating drug deals, escalating in size, and then he got involved in the biggest deal that he had ever done, and he went to make the exchange, the money for the drugs, and there was guns involved, etc. And he went to the place to make the exchange. Excited because it was the biggest deal of his life and he was going to make, I'm sure more than $1 million on this one deal. And he ended up in handcuffs. It was a setup. The FBI was in on it. Everybody got arrested because there was so much drugs involved. And I think he probably already had a record. He was looking at some very serious charges. He was young and full of himself, and he's like, well, whatever, I got plenty of money, I'll just get myself the best lawyer in Manhattan and he'll get me off. So he went and he had enough money from, I guess, previous drug deals, and he found the best criminal lawyer in Manhattan and got an appointment, after he made bail, obviously, after he got out of jail, and explained his case to the best criminal lawyer in Manhattan. And the lawyer listened to the whole thing, and he said, okay, I understand what you're telling me, and I'm going to be straight with you. I mean, I didn't get the reputation that I have by misleading my clients. I can probably work the system and get you about a 20 to 25 year prison term if we're lucky. Better than that, not going to be possible. the amount of drugs involved and what you were involved in, and the implications of the stuff that you were using, and minors and this and that and the other thing. You're looking at multiple life terms, and I think we can get you to 20 or 25 years, but we're not going to get you better than that. And now this 19-year-old man realizes just what kind of trouble he's in. He's so depressed. He doesn't even know where he is. He just wanders into a diner, and he's sitting there and so depressed. And after a while, he's sobbing. It's like, how did my life go so wrong that I'm 19 years old and the best that I can hope for is a 20-year prison term? I'm going to lose the best years of my life. And he's just sobbing. And an old man, right? So this, by the way, this happened in the 60s, right? So we started the story in Israel, a man in his 70s. So this is taking place in the 1960s. And so he's sitting there in the diner, he's sobbing, and this older man sees him and kind of walks over and says, in Yiddish, what's the matter? Now, this guy's, our boy, our 19-year-old, is totally unreligious. But at that time, a lot of people spoke Yiddish, even if they weren't religious. And he says, what do you care, old man? I got problems. I got real problems. And the old man looks at this young Jew and he says, you think you know from problems? And I don't. I know from problems. And he rolls up his sleeve and there's the tattooed numbers, right? So he was an inmate in a concentration camp. He knew from problems. He was starving. He lost all his family. I don't have to tell you what the concentration camp experience was for most Jews. And even the 19-year-old could see, okay, so I guess you do understand problems, but you don't understand my problems. And the old man says, so tell me. So he tells him the whole story. He tells him that he's been a criminal and what he's been involved in and the charges that he's facing, and that the best he can hope for is 20 years in prison, according to the best criminal lawyer in Manhattan. So the old man kind of strokes his beard for a moment. He says, you don't need a lawyer. You need a Rebbi. And the 19-year-old says, Rebbi, what? He says, you need a Rebbi. Come with me. This guy has nothing to lose. He doesn't know what else to do. He says, fine, I'll meet your Rebbi, whatever. So he goes with this old man, and it's I think it's the name of that Rebbi that is the Skaloner Rebbi. I'm probably saying that wrong, and I apologize, but it's something like the Skaloner Rebbi. So it's a Rebbe of a small sect, right? Chabad is a very large Hasidic sect. Breslov is pretty big. Belz is pretty big. Skloner is much smaller. But, they definitely have a few thousand people, and they have their Rebbe, and he has his headquarters there in Brooklyn. So the old man takes the 19-year-old, and they wait for quite a while. The Rebbe is always seeing people. People are always coming to their Rebbe for advice. Everybody who has difficulties goes to see their Rebbe. And finally, he gets in there and he gets this meeting with the Rebbe, and he tells the Rebbe his story and what he's been doing, what he's been involved in, and the charges that he's facing. And the Rebbe looks at him. Don't be worried about your lawyer. And that's it. That's all the Rebbe said. He said, don't be worried about your lawyer. The 19-year-old says, that's it? That's what you got for me? Ugh. Now, Rebbis, you should know, and you've heard me tell stories before, Rebbis, the reason that they're Rebbis is they have a vision. They can see things that other people can't. And they say things that they need to say and not more. So, the 19-year-old really feels like he got nothing out of this. He goes back into his depression. Eventually, he gets his court date, and he's going to be accompanied by the best criminal lawyer in Manhattan. And, he gets to court, and the prosecutor's there with all the assistant prosecutors and all their boxes of evidence that they're going to present to send this guy to jail. They hope for a lifetime. He's hoping just going to be 20 years. And his lawyer, the best criminal lawyer in Manhattan, doesn't show up. He's not here. Finally, this young guy comes running up, looks like he's the same age as the 19-year-old, like really young. Nice suit, but really young. And he says, okay, your lawyer, he's the name partner at my firm, got caught up in another case in Cincinnati. He was supposed to be back this morning. That flight is delayed. He can't be here right now. He sent me. Don't worry. He explained everything to me, what's going on. I know what I need to say. Everything's going to be fine. And the 19-year-old's like looking at this kid in a nice suit. He's like, it's going to be fine. I hired the best lawyer in Manhattan, and now I got this kid defending me. Oh, my life is over. So the case starts, and the prosecutor, makes their opening statement and shows, like, this is an open and shut case. I mean, they have all the evidence, everything going back, the records, the tapes, everything. Then the young lawyer gets up, and he starts talking, and it becomes very clear that he doesn't know what the heck he's doing. In fact, it becomes clear pretty soon that this is not only an inexperienced lawyer, this is the first case this young lawyer has ever argued in front of a judge. He's nervous, he's rambling, he's incoherent. This whole thing makes no sense. Everyone in the court is rolling their eyes at what a schnook this lawyer is. And the prosecutors can't even contain their laughter. They're like, oh, this is going to be such an easy case to win. So finally, the schnook, the rookie lawyer, the young rookie lawyer, winds up his interminable and, amateurish effort at the opening statement and sits down. And then the judge bangs the gavel on the table. And he says, having heard the opening statements of the prosecution and the defense, I'm going to make my own ruling for summary judgment. The prosecutors have not made a case that will stand up in any criminal court, and there's just no case that's been brought here. Case dismissed. The prosecutors are shocked. Everyone is shocked. The young lawyer just kind of looks like that. The defendant, the 19-year-old criminal who's looking at a life term, 20 years if he's lucky, has just heard the judge say, case dismissed. He cannot believe it. He thinks back to what the Rebbi said. He said, don't worry about your lawyer. And now he looks at this young lawyer and he says, wow. I don't know what you said or what you did, but I guess we're just really lucky that the judge was some kind of a schnook and just said, didn't really listen to what the prosecutor said. And the kid said, the young lawyer says, the judge is not a schnook. The judge is my grandfather. And he knew this was my first case, and I guess he wanted to be kind. And now we understand why this is a Rosh Hashanah story. My friends, next Friday night and Saturday and Sunday, everyone in the world, all of us, right? We're not people who have souls. We are souls, we have bodies. The portion of our soul which always remains in the world of souls and comes down and visits us on Shabbos, that part of our soul is going to come before God and the heavenly court on Rosh Hashanah for judgment. And we're going to receive our decree for the coming year. We should tremble we should realize during this last week, this is a time to examine our deeds and to look at the past year and ask ourselves, there's a lot of areas where we could do better. I regret that I didn't do better. Please, God, strengthen me to do better in the coming year. That's what we're supposed to be doing right now. And we should be ashamed of the areas in our lives where we let people down, where we let God down, where we could have done better in fulfilling our mission in this world, where we could have been more menschy. We should be ashamed. But we shouldn't be depressed. We shouldn't be terrified. We should tremble, but not be terrified. Why? Because all of us are children of God. We have a special relationship with the judge. He wants us to succeed. He wants to give us a kind decree. We're gonna get the benefit of the doubt. And that should give us joy, and it should actually add to the strength that we're requesting from God to help us do better. So in this week, as we lead up to Rosh Hashanah, during Rosh Hashanah itself, during the days of awe between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, during this whole holiday season that extends from the beginning of Elul, the last month of the Hebrew year, all the way to the end of Sukkot and Simchas Torah, this whole penitential season, we should rejoice that, like the schnook young lawyer, we have a special relationship with the judge. We're going to get the benefit of the doubt. It doesn't excuse us from doing our work. We all have to do our work. And for the sins we've committed against other people, we need to apologize to them. It's not enough to apologize to God. But that special relationship will help us in our trial. All right, let me see if there are any comments or questions. Whoops, I'm in the wrong thing. Here we go. Yes. Earlier I mentioned that the 9/11 hero who was the first to die on 9/11, taking on the terrorists, his name was Daniel Lewin. And Nina, actually, she writes all our Thursday heroes. Like, probably the most popular thing on our platform is the Thursday heroes. If you haven't seen our Thursday heroes, you should. And she just put a link in the comments to his story. And we shared his story as a Thursday hero alongside a Muslim hero of 9/11 also. So that link is in the comments. Lucy Ram Johnson asks, can someone have a tree house as a private domain and use it on Shabbat so it would be okay to put one's eruv basket there? Lucy, that's a great question, and I believe the answer is yes. Right? So already we saw the sages say that if you meant to establish your dwelling up in the tree, then you and your food are in the same place, and the eruv is a valid eruv. Now we might ask, but aren't we going to make use of the tree, which we're not allowed to do? We're not allowed to do on Shabbos. And I think that making use of a tree within a private domain just to climb up to your house, I think that's going to be okay. I do think that's going to be okay. Certainly, according to Rebbi, it would be okay because of the doubt of that you could access it at twilight. But it seems to me that if it's within the private domain and you're just using it to get to another part of your private domain, I think that the status of the tree as a tree is probably nullified because you're just going from one part of your private domain to another. Whether it's your 4 cubits at the base that extends up to the treehouse, or the treehouse itself, it has partitions, it has walls around the floor of the treehouse, and we've already seen that there's a principle of extending partitions down, right? So the walls of the treehouse actually extend down to the ground as a legal matter, and so for sure that's a private domain. For sure you can put your eruv in it. And I think that we don't have a problem getting up into the eruv, even though you have to use stairs, sort of built into the tree to get there. That's my one little doubt is there a problem accessing the treehouse? But I'm pretty sure you're going to be okay with that. And you're going to be okay with that. That's my thought. Okay. Lynn in Texas says, this was a hard daf, but I love anything about trees in the literature. Totally baffled by the end of it. when the Yom Tov on Friday gets an eruv that can be carried away, totally confused. I just felt like to explain that one was going to be too difficult. So what I would say to you is when I've encountered a sugya teaching in the Talmud that's too complicated to just read it and understand it, I'm just not going to understand it by simply reading it. But so if I read it once, okay, and then I read it again and I just go one sentence at a time and I never leave a sentence until I know what that sentence said. And if I'm not studying on Shabbos, so I can take a couple notes there and say, wait a minute, what did that sentence just say? And write it out so that I get the meaning of the sentence and then go to the next sentence. So then it's going to be possible. Then it's usually possible to get it if you just go one sentence at a time. And all of us are sort of going a few sentences at a time, waiting for the meaning to become clear. But that just never works with the Talmud. You got to know what each sentence means before going on to the next. And that's why even just reading one daf a day can take a good hour. That's exactly why. The footnotes, especially in Art Scroll, can help us get through sentence by sentence. In the Koran, the elucidation of Rav Steinsaltz and his notes that he adds also help. But that's what I would recommend. A couple more. Another question. Anita Fields, how do I know that my sins that I've committed against others that I need to ask for forgiveness? Wait, how do I know my sins that I've committed against others that I need to ask for forgiveness? Are you saying that you're not, like, sins that you might have committed against other people and you're just not aware of it? If you're not aware of it, well, you're not aware of it. You're not going to be able to apologize unless they make you aware of it, and then you can apologize. But we do have kind of a catch-all, like the people we care about. We'll call them and say, listen, I can't think of anything specific I may have done against you, but there may well be something that I forgot, and I just want you to know I'm really sorry, right? So that's a good thing to do with people we care about. Then in terms of asking for forgiveness, our obligation is to ask 3 times. In other words, if I say to somebody, listen, I did such and such, I was wrong, and I'm sorry, and they say, well, I don't forgive you. What you did was terrible. Then you say it again. I'm really sorry. I wish I hadn't done that. And they say, I don't forgive you. And then you ask a 3rd time and they don't forgive you, you're done. You fulfilled your obligation. Right? So that's another teaching in the Talmud. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. We should all be blessed with a beautiful, uplifting, energizing, even rejuvenating Shabbos. All the best, my holy sisters and brothers.